Good evening again, everyone. Welcome to downtown Charrette for the Granite Quarry Community Plan. My name's T. Coker. I'm joined with my fellow Arnett Muldrow, Representative Aaron Arnett, also Randy Wilson with Community Design Solutions, and Andy Kalback with Mahan, Rykiel and Associates. I believe we've actually had either a group or one-on-one conversation with everyone in the room. So that's a fantastic thing. Thank you all for coming out this evening. What I'd like to do is start out with vision and goals. So this is our second site visit to Granite Quarry. During our first visit, Aaron and I met with over 100 people. We had a public meeting with 50 folks, and we wanted to listen and learn about you. And so basically what we've done is we've tried to take a stab at not only what we heard you say about who you are now, but also where you want to go. So if you'll indulge me, I'll actually just read this. Granite Quarry is a quiet, small Carolina town with a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. It's a place where residents enjoy a high quality of life with nice parks, good schools, and a convenient location with access to larger markets. Granite Quarry is a community that is enthusiastic about its future. It is a place with successful local businesses and bustling activity. It's a place where community partners are coming together to create a focused strategy to develop a downtown environment for residents and visitors to enjoy. Granite Quarry is committed to a shared vision for its future and is prepared to work diligently to reach its vision and to foster community pride, economic development, and quality of life over the coming years. So again, this is really what we heard you say about where you are and where you want to go. So more specifically, the goals for the project that we're working on now include the following. And these are also kind of the basic bullet points as far as what we're going to be talking about, our agenda for this evening's presentation. The first piece is understanding the market. That's retail market to create opportunities for investment. So new businesses coming into town, existing businesses can expand. Again, trying to figure out how to grow that retail market, both for internal, so residents, and also visitors. Build a unique character and strong sense of place. We're really focusing in on the area basically where we are. You call this traffic light down here the square, and so we're really looking at one block on either side of the square along US 52. Part of building that unique character is improving the physical environment. And so we're going to be talking about things like streetscape improvements, sidewalks, lighting, utilities. And then focusing also on individual properties. So it's not just about the public realm, it's also about buildings that you see out on 52. So we worked in a one-on-one format with 8 different property owners. And so we're going to actually show some photo renderings about, they're going to show what a site or a property looks like now, as well as what it could look like in the coming years. Create a connected community by growing your existing pedestrian and trail amenities in town. Really what we're talking about is taking Granite Lake Park, Centennial Park, Civic Park, and trying to figure out how not only to lace those parks together, but also try to figure out how to connect across 52, how to connect to your neighborhoods, your other assets. And so really we want Granite Quarry, we want to help you become a place where you can get out and walk, whether you're a senior, whether you're a family with children, we want this to be a place where you can go out and enjoy. And develop strategic partnerships with outside resources for economic development and marketing initiatives. Granite Quarry is a very small town. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there are a lot of good things about it, some of which I just read to you. But the fact remains that, that improvements take resources. Projects cost money. And so, fortunately, you have a lot of local and regional partners who are willing and able to help you with various endeavors. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ways that you can tap into those resources and again start to incrementally reach goals in pursuit of that community vision. Raise your hand if you participated in the online survey. Okay, great. Everyone but you, I'm sorry. That's great. Well, I just want to make a few quick points. We are going to have a report that really digs into the nuts and bolts of this, but I want to hit on a few things that I found interesting. So this was a question that said, please indicate which of the following prevent you from shopping more often in Granite Quarry. And so if it's blue, it means this prevents me. Yes, this prevents me. If it's orange or red, it's no, this does not prevent me. So if you look at these various categories, poor service, safety concerns, prices, inconvenient hours, parking, access, inconvenient to work, to home, none of these are issues. That's a good thing. That means that really you're set up for folks to be able to take advantage of your local businesses, because there's very little that's holding them back in terms of their desire and their ability to feel comfortable shopping. But when you get down to these last two, quality of stores, products, and lack of stores, products, and variety, you see that a lot of folks say, well, yes, this does prevent me from shopping in Granite Quarry. Moving on to another question that's interesting to me, please check the statement that best describes how frequently you shop in the following locations. What you see is that in blue, this is once or more per week. Salisbury, 90% of respondents said they shop in Salisbury once or more a week. Only 60% said they shop once or more a week in Granite Quarry. So again, going back, looking at the response here, you know, basically a lack of stores, a lack of products and variety. Well, we look to our neighbor to the north, we see that they have most of those things. It makes a lot of sense that you're doing a lot of your day-to-day shopping, not here in Granite Quarry, but in Salisbury. That being said, you know, 60% of you responded that you're shopping here once or more per week. One other interesting point I want to make with this question right here, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Blue is, I strongly agree. I want to have more restaurant options. That was number one with a bullet. Number two was, I want more day-to-day goods. And number three was, I want more specialty or unique shopping options. So people you are craving those things. You're craving those restaurants, those shops, that retail environment that frankly you're not getting enough of. You have it, but you just don't have enough of it here. So again, you're going elsewhere. And one last slide I want to show before I turn it over to Aaron. What specific stores would you like to see in Granite Quarry? Number one, grocery. Number two, food. Then we see that there are actually types of grocery stores that people specify that they want. So, you know, we're working in a community in South Carolina, Williamston. Like you, they had a Winn-Dixie. It wasn't that the store wasn't going well. It closed because Winn-Dixie went away. So, you know, they very much feel the hole, the void that not having a grocery, that impact that it has on a community. So really the takeaway from the community survey is there are certain types of retail offerings that you want to have in Granite Quarry. Grocery, restaurant, retail. You love shopping here. You want to shop here. There's nothing that's holding you back from shopping here other than the fact that you don't have all of the things that you want to buy. So really, I'd like to bring Aaron onto the stage to talk about the market analysis, and he'll be able to explain really in more detail the lay of the land in terms of the market and also some market-based opportunities.
Yeah, okay. All right, so grocery, restaurants, specialty retail. That's what you all told us that you wanted. So now let's see what the data said for us. So as you all probably remember, when we started this market analysis, what we did is we worked with the businesses in town to help us by conducting a zip code survey of customers. We did it for 1 week. I think it was the 3rd week in September that we did this, and everybody did it at the same time, used the same form, so it was very consistent. We had, I got some numbers on here to make sure I don't say it wrong. We had 38 businesses participate in the survey. The great thing about that is that's most of the businesses in town, the vast majority of the businesses in town. Had a great variety. We had retailers, we had professional services, we had personal care, we had a lot of auto service, and we had restaurants and retail. I probably just repeated myself there. So anyway, we're able to look at the market based off of Granite Quarry as a whole, but also the different segments of the market and see where we're pulling customers from. The main reason why we do that absolutely is to see, you know, what geographies are our businesses relevant to, number one. Number two is based off of those geographies, what is the potential for growing our businesses here in our community. So during that time we had just over 2,500 visits in all those businesses over the course of that week. That's a lot. That's good. Again, that's a testament to all the businesses that helped us. From that, there was 177 unique zip codes represented. So there was 28146, that was one. Then there was 176 others. If you look up here, this kind of compares you all to other communities. This is not scientific because other communities may have done it at different times of year. They may have had a different number of businesses participate. But you see, generally speaking, the communities to the far left of this chart have a broader overall customer base. They're pulling people from more places. People to the far right, they have a more localized customer base, and you know they're more relevant just to their immediate area and immediate community. You guys can see you're here in the upper third. That's really good. That's awesome. You know, I think that's really a testament to your geographic location, Highway 52, and certainly the business mix that you have here. This survey was done, now again, take it with a grain of salt because this was done probably 15 years ago in Salisbury. At the time when that was done, there was 208 unique zip codes that was done. About a decade ago, we did the same project down the road in Albemarle. They had, I believe it was, I forget, just over 50 unique zip codes during that time. So you can kind of see the spectrum here. Now, there's one important thing when we're talking about this. This is real customers. This is people from 177 different places that are here physically in your community. However, there's one destination-based business that we did use in this survey. If we take that one business out, we go from 177 down to 77. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing at all because, like I say, there's still 177 different people from different places that are coming here. But it just shows that while they are here, while they're physically in this community, and that one business is capturing them, they may not be sort of cross-pollinating and going to other businesses. So that's an opportunity for us to figure out, okay, how can we capture that? We know they're here, how can we capture that? When we look at the sort of the aggregate of where everyone's coming from the survey, you can see that 19% live in the town of Granite Quarry of your customer base. So about 20%, 1 in every 5 customers came from Granite Quarry. Not out of the ordinary at all. Another 27% came from the 28146 zip code, but outside of the town limits. So that could be Faith, that could be unincorporated areas, and that could be the southern portion of Salisbury as well. So that's about 46% come from that one zip code. Next is Rykiel at 15%. The other two Salisbury zip codes at 8 and 6%, respectively, down to the south at Gold Hill and some of the other places as well. Outside of North Carolina, it's about 2%. All told, I think there's about, I don't have the slide up, but I think it was about 88% of all customers came from Rowan County. Again, that's something that's very common when we see that kind of localized customer base in a community like yours, in a small town and more of a rural place. Seeing 88% of your customers from the county is fairly common. All right, so that's just the sheer numbers of where people are coming from. We have to figure out what that means in terms of trade areas. If you look at zip codes, not all zip codes are created equal. Some are much larger than others in population. Some are much larger than others in area. So we have to find a way to equalize those. So to figure out what those local trade areas are, we look at the visits per 1,000 population of those areas, and that allows us to map those trade areas. The ratio that we come up with there, we look for specific breaks in those numbers, and that'll tell us what's the primary, the most loyal local customer base, people that really associate first with your community before they associate with somewhere else, or secondary trade area, people that may live still close to you, they're still a loyal customer base, but they can go in multiple places to get their goods and services and shop. So from a mapping standpoint, what that turns out to be, and this is something that I expected to see before we ever did this market analysis. Knowing that you have Salisbury up to the north of you, I fully expected to see your trade areas reaching out to sort of the area around Granite Quarry and then going to the south. And that's exactly what's happening here. Your trade areas are the 3 zip codes of 28146, the main Granite Quarry zip code, 28138, Rykiel, and 28071, Gold Hill. Spencer actually showed up as your secondary trade area. And it was interesting, and as we started to talk to some of the businesses here to understand that, it made sense because a lot of folks in there really patronize some of the businesses that you have here, whether it's the bank, whether it's some of the other service businesses that you have here, and that's the reason why they are relevant to your market. The only other thing I want to show you on this map, and you can barely see it on here, but this light blue area, the 2 Salisbury zip codes, and then the Richfield zip code. Those aren't part of your local trade areas, but you're doing pretty good in those areas. And they're, in fact, almost part of what we would call that secondary trade area. And most importantly, this area up here. You know, even though Salisbury has all the goods and services and businesses and restaurants and everything else, and your trade areas are moving towards the south, you're still doing pretty good up there. So I didn't expect to see, and I was glad to see that. So now, once we figure out what those trade areas are, we do the more detailed market analysis. The final report and plan is going to have so much data that your eyes are going to cross. So I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights here. We'll do a number of different, or we have done a number of different studies. The main thing we've done is called a retail leakage study. It's basically a supply and demand study. So remember that map from the previous slide. What this does is it looks at those individual trade areas and it compares what stores that exist in those trade areas sold in the previous year to what consumers who live in those trade areas purchased in the previous year. So if consumers purchased a lot more than the stores sold, that means dollars are leaking out to other places. That means that the mix of goods and services that you have in your community aren't quite meeting the needs of the local population. Very common, extremely common in a rural community, extremely common in a rural community with a retail center directly to the north. So from the trade area standpoint, what we have here is your primary trade area, those 3 zip codes that we showed in orange on that map. The stores sold $210 million in the previous year, and the residents spent $675 million in the previous year. So that means dollars are leaking outside of that orange trade area to the tune of about $465 million. Secondary trade area, the stores sold $89 million, and the residents that live in that area spent $39 million. So there's $50 million of inflow into that. We combine them together, and you can see here that you have about $415 million of leakage. Now, leakage, yes, we may not be meeting the needs of our local population, but in terms of a revitalization plan, in terms of economic development, this is actually not a bad thing because this is our framework for business recruitment and business growth. We have this amount of demand and opportunity within our trade areas that we can try to capture some of that opportunity and locate it here in our town. So the next slide, don't worry, I will not read this, but it takes these numbers, the numbers that I showed you across the top, or I showed you on the previous slide, is that one line across the top. But I like to put this slide up just to let you know we do the exact same thing, supply and demand, for about 65 different business categories and retail categories. So we can drill down to the scale of what that opportunity is by various categories. So grocery, restaurant, specialty retail. Then what we do is we do a capture scenario. You're not going to be able to capture 100% of what's leaking your trade areas. A lot of those folks in 28146 that are part of your trade area, well, they live in Salisbury. They're a little bit closer to they're a lot closer to some of the businesses that exist up to the north of you here. So they're going to continue to shop in those locations as well as shop down here. But you're not going to, again, be able to recapture 100%. So we look at a pretty conservative scenario where, okay, if we're able to recruit additional businesses, help our businesses expand based off of what these opportunities are, and actively market our community, we can recapture some of that which is leaving our area. So in this scenario, I'm looking at just 10%, so one in every $10 that's leaving that primary trade area, and 5%, one in every $20 that's leaving your secondary trade area. That gives us a potential capture scenario, or a potential capture number. We know what these stores sell per square foot, these individual retail categories, so we can drill down into the actual square footage of supportable retail space. So within your trade areas, based off of this, we feel that you guys can support up to 99,000 square feet of additional retail and business space in all these different categories. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that when you look at the individual categories, because you have to sort of think about it in context with the market and the offerings that you have here. But there is a lot of opportunity here. What I want to do is just highlight the big ones for you, the key opportunities. The first thing is grocery, because that was a big one here, obviously. I mean, from the very first meeting we had, we saw that as one of the key needs as expressed by you guys. If we look at the leakage, there's about $4 million in demand within the town of Granite Quarry. The industry standard for a grocery store is about $14 million per year. Smaller towns, that average is a little bit lower than that. The industry standard also is about 45,000 square feet for a grocery store, which incidentally is about the exact same size as the former Winn-Dixie, former Fred's out there that you have in there. So that's the industry standard for grocery. Now, if we look at your demand within the town and sort of the immediate region outside of your town limits, frankly, you're leaking or you have demand for about half of the industry standard for a grocery store. So what this tells us right now is that can we support a full traditional 45,000 square foot grocery store here right now? Well, these numbers are saying, well, maybe not. So we have to think, well, what does that mean for us? We know we have a need here. We express a need. We have a desire for that. Our numbers are showing that we have a certain amount of demand. So what does this mean for our community? And I think the main thing here that we have to think about is, we have to look for sort of some alternative solutions here. And I think there's some real opportunities that you guys have here in Granite Quarry. The first thing is, which is a very real opportunity, is some smaller format grocers that exist. We know within our market we have, and incidentally it's the closest one to you guys, an Aldi up the road in Salisbury. But Aldi is a small format grocery store. They average about 17,000, 18,000 square feet. Some are a little bit bigger, some are smaller. You have enough demand probably to support that size of a grocery store. One that's not in your market, but also is a very real opportunity from the numbers, is Piggly Wiggly. I'm sure, in your travels to the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina, you've been to a Piggly Wiggly before, and those independent grocers. Again, small format grocery store. There is the potential, I feel, for you all to reach out to them and see if you can recruit them to your community. Again, they're not in this immediate market right now, so it would certainly take a conversation to try to get them to bring them this way. I think the closest one to you all is in Siler City. So, but they certainly are in North Carolina, so that's a real opportunity as well. There's other smaller format grocery stores. We have a downtown Publix in Greenville, South Carolina that's 20,000 square feet. Well, first of all, Publix isn't in this market. Second of all, Publix, small format grocery store, it goes in urban markets. Same thing, Fresh Market. That's something you see from around here. Fresh Market is about a 20,000 square foot product. But again, they don't go in small towns, quite frankly. So we have to figure out what fits our need, what fits our market, and what we can do to recruit. I think there's two other things that are real opportunities for you guys. One is, like other communities have done, is looking at some of your existing businesses that may, in this case, be relatively new. The Patterson Farm Market over here at the Brinkley Center, and maybe look at opportunities to help them expand, and help them fill that void. That's a very real opportunity. We have this one down in Greenville, South Carolina called the Swamp Rabbit Cafe and Grocer. It's right on the Swamp Rabbit Trail in Greenville, not up in Travelers Rest. But they just got a $100,000 USDA grant to double the size of that grocery store in that community. So that, I think, is a very real opportunity. Another one, which is much more creative, but you again see it all throughout North Carolina. There's one in Hendersonville, there's one in Burlington, and there's many all around the state. Is a cooperative type grocery store. Those things are very real opportunities here. The great thing about particularly these two alternatives is this isn't your standard fare. This is something that's part of a destination type business. They're going to pull people not just from the immediate area, they're going to pull people from all over. So the next key opportunity was building materials and supplies. Within your primary trade area, you're leaking about $35 million. That's a tremendous amount of demand. It really is. I think a typical Lowe's does about $45, $50 million. So we're like, whoa, we can almost support that. Well, that's not really the case, because this is the most complex of all categories, because a lot of the subsets of this categories are straight business-to-business sales. They're not consumer sales. But if I take that out of the equation, if I remove those categories that have business to business, it's about $14 million of demand that you have within the trade areas. If we take it through our conservative capture scenario, we see that you all here in this community can support about 11,000 square feet, just under 11,000 square feet of space in this category: home supply, hardware, paint, landscaping, and those sorts of things. Well, it just so happens that's about the exact same size of an ACE type product, true value type product. You have demand for something like that here. This sort of sets the stage for us to take this data and go out and start to open up conversations with these businesses and see if we can bring them into the community. Again, much like what we were talking about with an expanded Patterson's or a cooperative grocery store, an ACE hardware type store, these can be destination type businesses. The quality of those really are, it's at a different level than your typical Home Depot or those sorts of things. And then finally, restaurants, dining opportunities. A lot of demand in your trade areas. A lot of demand in your trade areas, about $23 million. Both in your trade areas as well as in the town limits of Granite Quarry. That's pretty much split right down the middle half, with full service restaurants, so sit down type restaurants, to limited service restaurants like fast food or Subway or anything like that. So again, it's split right down the middle there. I think some very important points about this opportunity here, a couple of things. One is, I didn't mention what that destination business was that had so many zip codes in the area, but it is, it's the winery down to the south of town. So looking at opportunities, we know we have the demand. Is there some type of dining establishment that we can attract here that might help us tap into that market that we know is already coming here and grow our destination status as a community? I think that's a real opportunity here. I think that another thing that's very important is anything that we have, a restaurant, any business that you have in downtown, it doesn't matter how many visitors have come into your community, their bread and butter market is going to be the locals, the people that live within the area. So even if we are tapping into a market that's more visitor based, it has to be relevant to our market. In this case, in dining, I think we really have to focus on sort of the northern part of our trade areas and the people that live in the northern part of 28146, and make sure this is something that's relevant to them. Make sure it's something unique to us here in this community, and that we can pull people from outside the area. But again, you know, you look at examples from other places. This is Sidewall Pizza in Traveler's Rest that came in, and it's in an old auto service shop, and they redeveloped that, and they turned it into a great establishment. It also has some alcohol sales, and I know that can be an issue in some places, but there is demand for that here in this community. Something very important. And the other thing is half and half, full service, limited service. There's opportunities for in your market for other types of chain type restaurants. And we know some restaurants that you have within this market have been looking in this area and want to be here. Our data showing that they can be supported here. So that's the market research. And as I said, there's loads and loads and loads of other data that you're going to see in the market analysis in the report. But this also informs a lot of the design recommendations that Andy and Randy are going to share with you.
Yeah, actually, that's a good segue. Thanks, Aaron. Aaron and T have kind of give you some of the background as to the numbers and the forms and square footages and some of the leakage, and then also some of the spirit of what we're headed to now share with you. And what this really is now we're going to apply some of that data, some of that background into actual physical plans, in particular one plan. Just a quick run through of kind of what we heard on Tuesday night, as well as what we observed. 52, obviously, there's this traffic, there's a speed issue, there's some concerns for safety. It is kind of a barrier from one side of the downtown to the other. We recognize that. I mean, T and I were only here 10 minutes before we almost got T-boned and literally had honked at, and we were actually in our car. So based on what Aaron just told you, there is a need for new businesses. We need to look at places to house those businesses, which we'll be sharing with you shortly here in a plan. Surprisingly, the downtown is really walkable. Like when we got here and we were in the car, I was like, wow, it's moving fast. It's moving fast. You're kind of in and out. But when you get on the ground, you can walk from this point down to the hot dog stand in about 6 minutes. And you can walk from this point up to the vacant gas station in literally another 6 to 8 minutes. That's considered really nice and walkable and comfortable. The interesting part is to get from here to across the street, that's more of a running issue. And that's about 38 feet. So we heard a lot towards the end of Tuesday night about streetscape improvements, kind of creating that personality that makes Granite Quarry. And of course, architectural facade enhancements, which Randy's got several things to share with you on that. And then at the end, and I think this is where we took our marching orders very seriously, let's focus on the core, which I really want to commend you on. We do a lot of charrettes where we get kind of, we got to focus out here, focus there, and we usually do, but we usually try to concentrate. You got to build momentum. You want to build that energy, and you usually want to concentrate it in the core. And we want to commend you that you recognize that right out of the gate, and we feel like we can help you with that. The opportunities, based on what we heard, what we've seen, create the there, build the core. We heard that from you all. We're going to try to embrace the energy that's down here already and continue to accelerate it. T mentioned earlier, we've talked about, there's a very strong residential population here. One of the things that that kind of population really enjoys and really seeks a lot of desire to have are park spaces. And you have those. There's Centennial Park, Granite Lake Park, and Civic Park behind us that are all very well done and they're very well used, and we want to continue to build on those assets. Again, we heard about infill, and there's some redevelopment opportunities based on some property meetings that we had and sites that we visited. Gateway signage right at the edges of downtown, which we'll talk about more here. And then, again, just a repeat, facade architectural improvements. Just a little bit of orientation. Whoa, sorry. Itchy trigger finger. Just to get you kind of Whoa.
Lasers in the middle.
Sorry, yeah. That's about the 50th time I've done that in my life. downtown is here, and to get everyone oriented, 52 to the north, obviously, is headed here. And then moving southward, Centennial Park, Granite Lake Park. Then we've got one of the quarries that we've heard so much about here, and then other quarry located just off the sheet to the south, and Civic Park here to the west, and then the old stone house, which is located here. All of this we've taken into account, but we're going to spend the remainder of tonight really talking about the core area of the downtown. Just taking that a little step further, here's the downtown, just to give everybody a little better perspective, to get you oriented as we go in through some of the recommendations. Centennial Park again, this is where the new Family Dollar is. You know, we feel like Church Street and 52, when you're coming in from the north into the south, that really starts to set the tone. That's where your gateway into downtown is. Currently, we recognize that there's an old fueling station that's there that we could look into. We're all sitting right there, literally probably on the edge of that purple dot in the town hall right now. F&M's, some of F&M's buildings. You know, these red areas represent between some property ownership visits and just walking the town and talking to various people. These are areas that there are some vacant lands that we looked at, and we're going to share some thoughts on those. Again, southern end of town, you know, where the existing light is where we feel like that's kind of we're torn between that location and here. What is the real gateway into downtown? And then we started hearing everyone here on Tuesday night refer to that as the square. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's sort of where you've really entered, and this is where the heart and soul seems to be building up on. Civic Park, of course, on the west side here. These purple dots represent some areas that and site visits and things that Randy's going to share with you all shortly. So we developed a plan. Just a quick overview on this, and we're going to get into it in a little greater detail here. Again, 52 is coming through here, Salisbury to the north, and then heading off sort of east here. We are sitting in City Hall, which is that little orange building there. All of these orange buildings represent existing buildings. All of these darker sort of brown, reddish buildings represent which could be future development, redevelopment, and some infill development. This is Centennial Park as it exists, and we're going to talk about this in a little greater detail. These green areas representing some expanded and park opportunities. Civic Park, of course, over here on the left, on the west. Sorry, the rail line, which is a little faint here, but that's that line that is paralleling Main Street. So we're going to break this down into a few pieces and then go through these, but essentially Highway 52, again, parks and open spaces, linkage and trail opportunities, which we heard a lot about, infill again, and then we're going to talk a little bit about creating place, which was just some fun things to do to kind of personalize Granite Quarry, and obviously architectural enhancements. I'm going to start with Highway 52. In particular, what we've talked about is the sort of core area, which is represented in that dark brown stripe. It's approximately 2.5 to 3 blocks. Again, we feel like Church and 52 is a logical gateway site to the north, and then Bank at 52 to the south. And what we've come up with is this is sort of a prototypical, just a small section of it, ironically right outside here, where we'd like to see 52 head. We understand the safety issues. We understand the barrier that it creates, so we've got some thoughts on it. Currently, it's 3 lanes, which the turning lane is located in the center. What we'd like to recommend is to keep the curbs in alignment where they are. Remove that center lane and begin to introduce a narrow median that could be planted either with trees or with low landscape, but just to start to break the street down, to try to slow people down, to try to let people know you're coming into a place that's no longer a 3-lane roadway blasting through town. Part of that is to also start to consolidate curb cuts. What this does is that we're starting to take areas that were normally all dedicated to getting cars in and out of parking lots and giving it back into sidewalk zones and zones for people to walk and connect to other places. Part of that was also to consider these blue lines representing the Carolina Thread Trail. If we could slow people down and we could slow cars enough down, then we should consider relocating the bike lane out onto the street into a dedicated lane, and you'll see some visuals on that Randy's got to share with it on later. And then the last piece of that, in terms of just sort of the hard structure to it, is the walk out front here, I believe it's right out front of here at City Hall, is about 6 feet wide. That's pretty typical, comfortable, sort of standard for areas that are in downtowns for people to pass. Some of the sidewalks are a little bit narrow, particularly when you've got cars coming by. They're probably about 3 feet. We'd recommend expanding those sidewalks to 5 to 6 feet total width. When I say expanding, you keep the curbs where they are on the little lawn strip that exists, but just start to move those sidewalk zones back in towards properties. Obviously, if they're encroaching into private properties or property ownership, then you have to work with them and come to agreements to do that. And then some of the amenity factors that came up to sort of personalize it, including crosswalks. We'd love to see the crosswalk even enhanced down here at Bank Street. There's a logical actual crossing that could happen here that we're going to talk about more. And then all the way up the other gateway. Those would be, I think, the minimum areas we'd love to see crosswalks that were enhanced in and sort of pronouncing the pedestrian zones. And then pulling in things like lighting, ornamental street lighting, banners. Street tree plantings are always a great thing to do. Obviously, we have limited space, actually no space between curb and sidewalk here. We'd recommend pulling those trees in back inside the sidewalks anyway, or back between the sidewalk and property owners. You work them in wherever you can get them in that situation. They may not be in regulated distances, but even when you look at the street trees the trees that are out in the park around the ATM here, they really start to create that ambiance of what we're after. And then pulling in site amenities, which is just the fancy term for benches, receptacles, bike racks, things of that nature. We're going to move on to talk about some parks and open space opportunities. And all of this is sort of building a framework for what we'll talk about last. Centennial Park, of course, exists here and it has wonderful walking trails in it. Tina and I walked through it. I mean, it really serves its purpose. It really is a nice amenity for the community. It really does a great job of pulling people in and providing that sort of resource within the downtown. Civic Park, of course, is here. Gives you a little bit more of an active recreational feel to it with ball field, tennis courts. I think there were basketball courts down there. I don't recall. Some opportunities that we see. Actually, the one last existing piece is the small park that F&M did over here to the sort of right side of the bank here that has the gazebo in it is a nice little area too. Maybe it's underutilized slightly, but we're going to enhance that a little bit. Some opportunities that we see. One, we think there's an opportunity to extend Centennial Park down through where the low-lying area here is to the southeast towards 52, ultimately potentially even connecting up to 52. It's a lower area. It would be great to extend those walking trails and even give the Centennial Park presence up on 52 almost as you're coming into downtown. The other thought is to extend this park area down to Brown Street. Currently, I think it's just a vacant lawn area, so that what we're trying to do is build these park connections and pull them back out to 52, ultimately striving to set up the tone that we can link these parks back together in certain cases with streetscape and in other cases with some walking paths and trails. Same scenario here. This is I gotta say, my favorite space in downtown is right behind here with the ATM. It's a fantastic environment. One consideration we would offer, and I promise you it's not a major, we're not tearing down F&M, we were joking earlier. If there's an opportunity to relocate that ATM at some point, this is an ideal spot for a town plaza. It's set back from the road. It could be themed up so it's a gathering space. It's visible from 52 as you're coming into downtown, and it really gives you that heart and soul. Everybody refers to that area down here as the square. It is a square, but your actual square for gathering, I mean, you're not going to gather on the corner of Bank and 52 too often, but you could use that space as a primary gathering space right up here on 52. And I'm not trying to single you out, believe me. The other longer term thought is to, and again, that's just starting to build up the connection from Centennial back to 52 and then ultimately connect back to Civic Park. A very, very long, or a much longer term option would be to look at extending Civic Park up to Main Street through field connections, and we're going to talk about some other ways to do that here shortly. So that again, you're building that language and building that green connection through into downtown. Sort of folding into that is the connection and linkage side of that, which is the actual pathways and trail system. You know, we feel like there's a rails and trails opportunity paralleling the existing rail line here on this side of the opposite side of Main Street, behind the buildings here, that starts to create a linkage northwest, southeast. You know, there's another opportunity, obviously, with the Carolina Thread Trail, to carry that up 52, and then making that connection back either across where Peeler comes through now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly when I talk about some infill, or that connection could continue to happen where you go up, make the trek down Church Street, and then come in this way. This particular connection is ideal because we start to get traffic, foot traffic, directly from Park to 52 and then back into the Park system versus trying to go up and around Church Street. And then, of course, the last component of that is, well, we've already got a nice little entryway into Centennial Park. We need to capture those people through some form of trail or bike path and get them down Bank Street to the entry into the park. And then a smaller component of that would be, building up on the walking trails that exist in the spaces now and pulling those down into Centennial Park. Now, the last layer of that is how does that kind of sets up the framework for development and redevelopment. And we've rolled in with property owner or property meetings and just footwork, and we've developed several sites that provide a bigger opportunity. And I'm going to start up here at the Church Street corner. We realize that there's a fueling station here that's underutilized. This is about a 3-acre site. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is a significant amount of land to look at some long-term, or to look at some infill. You've got an ideal corner site. You've got frontage on 52. We would love to encourage as much as possible to get these buildings up on 52, particularly within these 2 blocks. Because what we're trying to do is to build that core and that feeling of a downtown. We realize, it doesn't always happen. I mean, you have to work with what your resources and what you're negotiating, but as much as we try to, we preach this all the time to get the buildings up on the street as much as possible. Again, creating a small infill site as you come in off 52 headed south, great corner site there. We've got some smaller sites that are what we call more the gap or missing teeth, if you will, that are infill sites of smaller footprints. This all starts to harken back to the 99,000 roughly square foot number that Aaron has. These red areas represent some of those areas that you could look for some new business activity. This particular site really lends itself to something unique and oriented to the park, and that all that new open space that we've kind of connected back through. It's a really great residential site, perhaps even such that it's a little bit higher density. Could even be a retirement-oriented type development. It could be townhome. The point is, you really build off of the park and the energy of the park. You've got park frontage then for those type of units. I mean, that's something that's quite desirable in downtowns. The beauty of that too is that you can walk. I mean, you're literally within a 10-minute walk anywhere within the downtown if you're living here. Again, a little corner site we could capture here. This is a vacant property that we could build on and extend the existing center out there. This was an older building that could be removed and replaced with something, again, a little better, higher use. In all of those too, we'd like to encourage getting the parking behind the buildings as much as possible. Again, that's just trying to get the buildings up on the street and create that core.
Andy,
Sorry.
mention town hall too. Go back.
Oh, I'm sorry, the connection to town hall?
Yeah, and the potential for.
Oh, yeah, you just addressed the corner site. I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed one site. Again, this is a property that's probably a little underutilized, that there's an opportunity to get a larger footprint building right up onto 52 and Banks. It's an ideal site again when you're coming in. It's got a lot of high visibility to it. Is that? Okay, sorry. You can see we've rehearsed this since about 2 a.m. And I'm going to let Randy go through some architectural items.
So now all we're going to do is show some photo renderings to photo illustrate some of the plan recommendations that Andy has made. And what we're going to do is kind of interesting. I'm going to start over here at this end of 52 at the gateway, and then we're going to go to the very other end at the hot dog shack, Jason, and we're going to work our way right back to our sitting, okay? You get it? So we're going to start on this end of town, go to the other end of town, and come back. So I believe everyone knows where I am in this photograph. Basically, the old gas station is to my right. And the reason we honed in on this particular view is the fact that because of the bend in the road at 52, this just feels like a very natural gateway, particularly a natural gateway into the downtown area. I think everybody is aware you already have treated very well at this sort of community-wide kind of town limits. You have sort of a welcome to Granite Quarry gateway treatment, and those are great. You should also do the same thing when people arrive into your downtown. Now, one of the things that we heard about your outer community gateways is it does make perfect sense, and you've hit the nail on the head, and I would have done the exact same thing. When you're saying welcome to Granite Quarry, what should the signs be made out of? Exactly. Come on, use your big people. Use your big words, people. Exactly. If you're in Granite Quarry, you should use granite. But people also noted you have to be very careful about how that granite is treated for fear that it wouldn't look like a tombstone. Okay? And so what we'd like to do is illustrate a gateway sign here that you could also use at those others if you so chose, which utilizes granite in a different configuration. As opposed to a slab of granite, we're going to stack the granite. And so again, here's this deflected vista. You're coming down the roadway, you need to be looking straight at this bank of crepe myrtles, and we would propose it right in front of here. You put a welcome to historic downtown Granite Quarry sign there. And again, if you would prefer this one to be a little bit more humble and rather use this larger one out at the community gateways, that's fine. But the point is, use granite in it, but if you want to use it in a stacked configuration, perhaps that would remove the sense if it looks like a tombstone. There's some additional items that we see in this rendering that we need to draw your attention to. Long term, as Andy alluded to, all of this site to the right we think should be an infill development site. But in the meantime, go ahead and grass the lawn, and that way you can recapture both sidewalks and get people used to walking, and it provides a very good forecourt or foreground to the gateway sign itself. We understand that currently you all are participating in a countywide branding and marketing campaign. Once those recommendations flow back into the town, we would strongly encourage you to develop branded banners that reflect whatever is a recommendation for Granite Quarry. We would also recommend in the medium to the long term to introduce a strategic wayfinding signage system, again, that would play up on that brand. For now, I've just used your local school colors, okay? As Andy alluded to, we feel like it's very important. There's a reason why that lane is referred to in the industry as a center suicide turning lane, because you literally take your life in your hands when you enter it. And so long term, we would consider you would, wherever you don't have curb cuts or driveways, introduce a small median. Even where you do have curb cuts, perhaps you want to narrow that to provide enough width for what would traditionally be referred to as a bike lane, but in your case, we want to refer to this as the Carolina Thread Trail, which is a strategic network of trail systems that runs through your town and many others in the county. So again, before conditions and proposed conditions. So now we're at Jason's Hot Dog Shack, and the thing I have to say about this, any place that will serve you a double-decker chocolate moon pie as the dessert in your combo meal, that's a fabulous place to eat, okay? That's all I got to say about that. We enjoyed lunch at Jason's place yesterday. We talked about some interior renovations and some expansions, but he also allowed me to take a look at the exterior. What are some treatments that we might do, simple treatments that might kind of give a little bit more visual appeal and awareness to the Hot Dog Shack. What was very interesting, this was one of those cases where you get really lucky. I'd already been thinking in my mind about a paint scheme that would introduce kind of a wainscot and some stripes, and I was thinking, man, that gray burgundy would look really good on it. So I just happened to say, what are the school colors? He said, they're burgundy and blue. I said, yes. And so we were able to not only use those colors, but pick up on the school colors. So in the first phase, here we go. So the base, again, is this nice burgundy red, which kind of picks up on the school colors. And since he already has a nice cool gray, we're just going to introduce this sort of blue accent stripe. And then again, let's actually show some of the advertising of the place of business. And so we're going to introduce the sign as well as some of the logos. In phase two, while I would enjoy eating outside, you could almost not hear yourself think. It was so loud when the traffic would pass by. And so let's create an additional visual buffer between the person that's sitting there trying to eat and the roadway itself. And so by constructing and just putting planters out there that would have flowers and bushes and even small trees, again, it's both a visual barrier between the roadway and the place to eat, as well as probably would cut down on some of the noise. So hope you like that, Jason. He hadn't seen it before now, so. Oh, and long term, yeah. Yeah, and Jason, for fun, I showed long term what the implications would be if you went to the metal roof. Okay, just so you could see that. All right, so here's McKinney's Minis. I appreciated meeting with Chris and Jancy on this property. And it's always interesting to find out the history of buildings, and I realized that it really wasn't originally constructed as a mini warehouse, but later was adapted to that use. And of course, the other factor is here on the end is a really great outdoor-oriented business that's functioning there. So one of the challenges was number one, how can we kind of visually separate this use from this use? Now, normally, let me just say this for the record, it's kind of a good training opportunity as well. It is never a good idea to paint unpainted brick. Bricks were never really meant to be painted, but every now and then there might be a use for painting brick, and this is one of those cases where I'm going to paint this other building in order to distinguish it from the one to the right. Furthermore, we wanted to give some cover for these individual doors and perhaps upgrade and do something different in terms of the signage. And so again, by painting this sort of a pale green, since it's in an outdoorsy kind of place, now we can sort of distinguish it from the larger mass of the minis. And then each of these would receive a metal canopy and some gooseneck linings. And what I thought would be fun is let's paint the sign in sort of an old-fashioned distressed warehouse, because that's literally what it was. And if you remember, if you go into these big cities and you see the old cotton warehouses, they were always painted on the sides of the buildings. And so by doing that, we can almost, if you will, make the building feel a little bit older than it is. So again, your existing conditions and the proposed conditions. So here we have the intersection of 52 and Banks. Okay. And we would consider, probably like you, this to be what we refer to as the 100% intersection. It's kind of the key heart and soul of the downtown from a transportation point of view. As people have said repeatedly, it's just really difficult to cross this, especially in the east-west configuration. What I found striking, though, was even in the areas that you can walk easily, those are the only places that don't have the crosswalks. And so we feel like those ought to be introduced into this intersection. So we heard somebody on Tuesday night say, boy, it'd really be great to have stamped concrete or something visual and colorful inside the crosswalks. I couldn't agree more, and so your wish is granted. And so by doing this, some very important things. Number one, some things that will naturally slow down the motorist are when you bring things in narrower to the roadway. And the other thing is when they roll over textures. That's the reason we put speed bumps. And by virtue of stamping concrete or putting pavers, that texture will naturally slow down a vehicle as they roll over it and they hear and feel that rumble. Again, we're going to introduce the crosswalks to the right and to the left. You already have these stacked planters. We would just encourage, additional, more colorful flowers. Long term, very, very long term, because there's nothing in the world wrong with them. But at some point, I mean, again, given your granite history, ideally those planters ought to be constructed out of granite. Finally, again, long term, introducing wayfinding signage system once you have the branding back. And again, there's no reason not to introduce banners, and that alone is just another one of those things that you bring visual things into the cone of the driver to cause them to want to slow down. I sincerely apologize. I really did want to show an iteration where we did bury the utilities, but I just didn't have time. But and also, I think you understand it's very costly and it's very much a long-term solution. I will show that in 2 other renderings, but I'm sorry I couldn't do it in this rendering. Thank you so much, Mike, for allowing me to work with you here at the Brinkley Center. And this was one of those site meetings where I got so excited. I love meetings where, number one, the owner and I were thinking the same thing. I especially like it when I can save the owner money, and I especially like it when the owner has construction capability to actually do these things. And so, again, germane to the point I made previously, Mike and I talked about painting the brick. I said, no, don't paint that brick. The yellow brick looks really, really good. However, and again, I'm not saying anything to you that he and I haven't talked about. I don't have permission to say. Because of some of the doors and the colors of the canopy relative to the brick, even though it's a retail center, it kind of felt very sort of industrial. And he explained why. And he explained how, this was constructed out of a lot of building materials when they were building commercial type buildings. And so one of our strategic goals in enhancing this center is to kind of soften it so it feels more like a retail-oriented shopping center as opposed to almost a commercial type building. So one of the things that Andy does across America is he helps retail centers, shopping centers, kind of give facelifts. And one of the tricks that they've used, I just love, and I've stolen it. And what they do is they take strips of teak wood and they apply it over furring strips, and you can cover up portions of an outdated building and give it a dramatic facelift. And that's what you're going to see in just a second up here. But let's just go ahead and show it. So what we're going to do is we're going to install these furring strips on the brick up top, and then add these stained stained boards. And not only do you conceal the upper, but you can also increase the height, which becomes real important over here where he would like to conceal these air conditioning units. And so again, the nice thing as well is if he ever has a problem with the roof or has a problem with the brick, all he has to do is unscrew a few boards and gets right to it. It's a removable product. But I love the fact that it gives it height. You also now have kind of warmed up the entire building, and all of a sudden, oh, okay. Oh, we're gonna talk about them in just a second. All of a sudden, this tan yellow brick really looks good, doesn't it? Because it works with the overall palette of this sort of warm mahogany red, and now we're going to paint this canopy. It's okay. A green, and also introduce green in the gooseneck light fixtures, and now you've got this really 3-color scheme that warms everything up. Finally, as Aaron alluded to, you've got this demand for a local market, and maybe in the meantime, Patterson market can sort of solve that problem short term. Because there's really only space for one parking car out in front, we thought maybe we just stain this area and introduce an outdoor dining area that could be overflow from the market and the cafe. Finally, in the parking lot itself, and Andy actually drew this up, it was just so small you couldn't see it. At the end of, Mike's a smart guy, at the end of all his parking runs, he has an island that's marked out. And what we were encouraging is in those places, go ahead and introduce a low curb or some railroad ties, put in some ground cover or bushes and some trees, and you can really soften, the expanse of the asphalt in the parking lot. So one last time for fun and giggles, before and after.
Randy, columns.
Oh yeah, the column posters. So again, not only do we introduce these columns, but again, we just want to anchor them with your namesake granite. It's a durable, if a car or a door hits it, they'll only hit it one time. They won't hit it again, I promise you. But the fact is, again, any time that we can introduce your namesake material, we should. Thank you so much for reminding me of that. Brown Supply. Anybody with Brown Supply here? Man, I got jazzed when I found out how old the place was. And then when I was in the conference room working today, if you haven't seen the historic photo of Brown Supply, it's amazing. And so I appreciated the fact that given their long-standing history in the town, they wanted their building to look a lot less, I don't know what the right word would be, not quite as severe and a lot softer, and also to pick up on the granite history. And so we're going to first start with their building, then we'll talk about this building, and then we'll talk about the overall. So over here, the thoughts that they had were, first of all, to distinguish this building from this one, we're going to put an entire granite facade on that little one. And that way, again, you can now start to read them as two separate buildings. We're going to take that same granite, we're going to introduce a small wainscot along the base of the building. See that? And then paint the upper, everything that's currently stucco in white, a nice, what I call a buckskin tan kind of a color. And then we'll just paint the copings and the canopies, as well as introducing 2 new gooseneck lights in that sort of bronze color. So again, before and then existing for that building. And then for this building, if it ever changes hands, I've shown it with a graphic designer Again, a wainscot and a treatment that kind of unifies all of the colors since they own both of these buildings, kind of a similar motif. And then for those of you who requested that we bury the utilities, you can see the impact that would be made in an environment like this. I mean, it really does make a very big difference. So we'll go all the way back and then keep going. So before, just the Brown Supply building, this building, and then burying the utilities. Last but not least is Town Hall, and I'm so glad the fire chief's back because, well, that's okay. Whatever your role is, you're going to be excited in just a second. Okay. So first of all, here's our existing conditions, and I appreciate a meeting with the mayor and Susan as we talked about, what are some things that we can do to kind of dress it up. So here's some things that I just want to mention. I'm not being critical. I just want to tell you kind of what an outsider, when they come into your town, kind of what we experience. So I entered my GPS on your address, and as I came around town, the only thing I could see was this little piece, and it says fire or law enforcement. I forget what it says. Law enforcement. Yeah, and so my first question was, is this City Hall or not? And I thought, because some cities, you have fire in one place, police in one, and City Hall. And so I had to get all the way almost to here before I could look and see, oh yeah, it is City Hall. And I had a good clue based on the architecture. But my point is, we got to make sure with our signage that we send out very clear clues to people about what the building is that they're coming up. Number two, again, I'm not opposed to ribbed concrete, but again, you don't live in ribbed concrete quarry. You live in granite quarry. And so I would have preferred historically that they had used granite for the columns. And if you want to dress up this building in the future, that's one of the recommendations I'd make, and I'm going to show you in a second. We had this canopy, and there was some desire to kind of make it feel more prominent or fit better in the building. And the big thing, in case you didn't know, of course now you do based on a few minutes ago, there's actually a floor above us. And yet, bless these firefighters who tirelessly serve your community, they don't have a single window to look out of. Isn't that sad? Can I get an aw from everybody? There you go. All right. So let's give all the firemen windows to look out of. Okay. Now let's talk about the architecture. Number one, when you look at all of these elements as a whole, in my mind, they hearken to almost an Art Deco period. And so with that in mind, I chose what are called statuary letters. These are just big metal letters that attach to the top of a canopy. And it's sort of, now we know that this entire complex is the Granite Quarry Municipal Center. And then we're in this sort of Deco period, we're going to identify City Hall here, police here, and fire here. And by toning down the canopy to this bronze, I don't think it's quite as glaring on the eye, and it actually now sort of reads as a good sign panel. And then this is what it would look like if you were indeed to go back to granite columns. And again, we aren't replacing the columns. I think you understand the structure is embedded. The ribbed concrete is just a veneer, and so I would suggest you use granite for the veneer. And now what you really have in terms of architectural styles, in case you're curious, is this is a perfect international period building. It's spot on, the materials, the font, and everything. And again, now we have the windows for all the firemen, lights to create a rhythm at night. And then last but not least, oh, by the way, let's get rid of the crepe myrtles because unfortunately they really block your view and they cast all these long, deep shadows. And so if we remove this crepe myrtles, we're going to introduce large shade trees on the perimeter. And then also in the foreground, perhaps introduce some colorful flowers. And then finally, Andy talked about the importance of this connection from Town Hall right across the street to where the ATM is now that we hope one day becomes your Town Plaza, which would become your green connection back to Centennial Park. And so that needs to be a very clearly demarcated crosswalk. Number two, we finally want to illustrate for you what it would look like if you were to introduce medians wherever you can in the downtown on 52. In other words, where there aren't curb cuts, driveways, let's create a narrow median planted with ground cover. And with the space you recover, then again, you introduce the Carolina Thread Trail bike lanes. And again, introducing texture and color and pavers into that to slow down the car. And I'll tell you this straight up, hand on a stack of Bibles as a part-time preacher. That right there will slow your traffic down better than any posted speed limit sign you could ever plant, okay? You got to introduce visual things into the visual cone of people. It's going to slow them down, both because of the visuals as well as the textures and the color. So one more time and then we're done. It's the existing conditions, the architectural features, and then the streetscaping features. And now Andy's going to talk about other creative ways to use granite to help create a place here in Granite Quarry.
So we're going to continue the while in Granite Quarry, we haven't taken granite for granted. I'll stop. I know. But I mentioned earlier on the sort of creating the place, the character, the identity that is Granite Quarry. So I'm just going to go through a couple of slides. I'm not saying these are specific things that you need to put in your town, but these are some examples, some other places that have done some things that are pretty creative. You know, granite is not an easy thing to work with. So I just found it kind of amusing that, you know, you could take a piece of granite, like pull it apart like a piece of gum into an artistic form like that. You know, using sculpture in places, we've talked about parks and open spaces a lot. There are lots of places we could incorporate that. You know, again, that's pretty simple. You know, it's a pile of stones. This is I don't know if this is actually granite, but certainly could be applied. You know, again, an artistic feature you could actually use as a bench. I mean, this doesn't get any simpler than that. You know, perhaps it's telling the heritage of Granite Quarry. Could be, you know, poetry, art, some form of art form, etc. Again, just trying to animate spaces and create that identity that could be unique to Granite Quarry. And then taking that a step further, this is what we call functional art. I mean, these are literally stones. You know, this could be a line of granite that you use for a bike rack. This is a combination bike rack bench. Obviously, that's a little bit more of an artistic form of a granite bench that kind of takes on its own sort of identity. And then incorporating a different layer of landscape. We've talked a lot about trees and things like that, but there's also what we like to do a lot of anymore. It's called vertical green, and it's green walls or green screens. It's building sites or building sides that might be not the most attractive. You can plant them to kind of soften them up, introduce the color. You know, layers of planting like that. Obviously, that's a maintenance factor. You want to concentrate those in areas that really give you kind of the biggest bang for the buck, no pun intended. And then the final layer of that planting is starting to do, this is what a lot of shop owners would do to animate their storefronts. You know, container plants or pots of various forms. You know, these could obviously be granite. Just at the 11th hour, I couldn't find a decent looking granite planter for you all. But, you know, carrying that one step further. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to T.
Great. Thanks. Well, it's 7:12, so I promise we won't keep you more than just a couple more minutes. But I want to talk about where we go after tonight. So you've seen a lot of pretty pictures, photo renderings, plan view. You've heard about the market. Well, we're going to have to start to build some recommendations for you that allow you to go from where you are right now to reach that vision. So in terms of economic development, I'm not going to read this list to you, but you can see that there are some strategies that we want to work through with you. I think that one of the most important pieces that you've hopefully heard from everything we've said this evening is to focus on the core, and the core being really this 2-block stretch on either side of the square. Another thing, hopefully you're excited about the potential for certain types of businesses in Granite Quarry, and we think that you need to be prepared to go out and state your case, share the data that we provide. You know, go ahead and think about where certain types of projects could go. And so it's not just having that information ready, but you know, we actually recommend that you consider a way to create a team. Sometimes we call it a go team. It's, you know, if there's a chamber of commerce or, you know, a merchants group, if you have a representative from town hall, you know, a bank, certainly, if you have a core group of folks who can actually make things happen, those folks oftentimes are the ones you want to go and knock on someone's door and say, hey, we want you, this is where we want you, this is how we're going to help you get set up in our community, and you know, you just lay it out there for them. I think that in terms of transportation, trails, certainly groceries and food related issues. There are grants, state and federal grants, foundation grants that are out there that may be available for you moving forward. And then also from an organizational standpoint, something to consider in the short term is small town Main Street designation. We've worked in hundreds of Main Street communities. It's a time tested, proven approach to small town revitalization. And Aaron and I were talking about it, and he said, the first thing we should do, or that they should do when we leave, is check it out. Look into small town Main Street. And then in the longer or the medium term, municipal service district. The fact is that's not the kind of thing that you want to get into now, because it's, typically you're paying for marketing, for promotions, for certain types of services, and you don't necessarily have that marketing package pulled together. We're still working through the planning process, but again, it addresses one of the issues, which is funding. How are we going to pay for all these great things? Well, we're committed to helping you figure that out over the coming weeks and months. And the next big piece is marketing. So, of course, hopefully everyone in the room is familiar with the initiative that's funded by the TDA for destination branding for Rowan County. We strongly encourage Granite Quarry to not just have a seat at the table, but elbow your way into rooms maybe where you're not supposed to be. We want to make sure that you get a good product that's going to serve your community. Oftentimes, projects like this are very top down, and they certainly play into the hands of kind of the major players within a community, in this case a county. We want to make sure that Granite Quarry has a voice, that you're going to be able to get what you need in terms of marketing materials. And furthermore, we want to make sure that you're able to implement that marketing, that brand identity. Our CCC has a classroom full of kids who are ready to go out and help you create marketing materials. So it's just a matter of making those connections. Also, when we think about the core, the square, in a medium term, if once that intersection becomes developed, or maybe it's the square across the street, we want to figure out how to promote not just come to Granite Quarry, but come to the square, come to the core, come to downtown. I'm not quite sure what that language is yet, but that's kind of your next level, right? And then also, you've got the Carolina Thread Trail. It is, if you see this map back here, you can see how it runs through your community. Carolina Thread Trail in many communities, it's just a line on a map. But you have an opportunity through trails, greenways, bike lanes, and so forth to actually turn that into a reality. And there's no reason why in the coming years, once you build out that system, you can't market that, or that you can market that, so that you could become a trailhead for Rowan County. And then I'll leave you with one last thing, and that's communication. I'm so glad that all of you came out this evening, but I'm sure that there are other folks who aren't here because maybe they didn't know about this. And so we want to make sure that there's community dialogue, communication. You have a great sign out in front, but we encourage you to think about ways to kind of cast a wider net. I mean, social media, it's cheap, if not free. It can be time consuming, certainly for staff, but it's there. And take Facebook, for example. Started out as college kids only. Now the fastest growing cohort are seniors, particularly women over 65. So, it's out there. It's a channel, and it's not just a channel, a one-way means of communication. It's a way to have dialogue with your community. And so, again, all of these are things that we're going to be looking at and working with our steering committee on in the coming weeks. So, obviously, we haven't uploaded it because we're still recording it, but tonight's presentation will be on YouTube. I'll make that link available to the town, and so hopefully they'll be able to get that out. As far as our next steps, we're going to be working with our steering committee, using what we showed to you tonight kind of as the baseline, and actually have a very structured conversation about the specific recommendations that we're making. Really try to work through some of the details to make sure that our recommendations are really going to, make sure that they're based in reality. We'll create an actual plan document, and we'll come back to town at a date to be determined for a half-day implementation workshop. And so during that workshop, we'll have key stakeholders in the room. We'll look at projects. We'll look at overall strategies. We'll look at potential funding sources. We'll look at timeframes, and we'll basically try to hash it out and say, you are responsible for this project. Your funding can come from X, Y, and Z sources. It needs to happen during this time frame. And so we want to drill down to that level of detail so that you all feel like you have your marching orders, because it's great to have a pretty picture that can go on a wall, a big master plan. It's another thing entirely to have something that you can go out and use. And that's what we want to not only provide to you, that's something we want to create with you. So with that, again, thank you all so much for coming out this evening. Thank you all for your participation this week, for your participation throughout this planning process. We couldn't have shown you what we showed you, but for you and your interest, your passion, your enthusiasm. So thank you all very much. I'll wrap it up here. Our team will be here for a few more minutes, so feel free to come and talk to us and ask us any questions that you might have. But thank you all, and good night.
Good job.